The wind whispered through the ancient trees, sending shivers down my spine as I stood before the dilapidated mansion. Its windows were broken, and the once grand structure exuded an aura of decay and despair. The sky was overcast, casting a gray pallor over the scene that seemed to intensify the ominous feeling in the air. This was the infamous Hawthorne Manor, a place whispered about in hushed tones, a place known to be haunted. I had always been fascinated by the supernatural, drawn to the unknown like a moth to a flame. When I heard about the opportunity to stay overnight at Hawthorne Manor, I couldn't resist. The owner, a collector of oddities and artifacts, had turned the mansion into a sort of macabre bed and breakfast for thrill-seekers like myself. Little did I know, my fascination would soon turn to terror. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I gathered my courage and stepped inside. The air was heavy with the scent of mildew and decay, and the creaking floorboards echoed with every step. The dim light from my flashlight cast eerie shadows on the peeling wallpaper. I felt like an intruder in a world that didn't belong to the living. I made my way to the designated room for the night, the Rosewood Suite. The door let out a mournful groan as I pushed it open. The furniture was draped in dusty sheets, and an antique mirror reflected a warped image of myself, as though the glass itself held a twisted soul. Despite the chill that ran down my spine, I chuckled nervously, dismissing my unease as irrational. As the night deepened, I lay in the antique four-poster bed, staring at the ceiling. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. My eyelids grew heavy, and I finally succumbed to sleep. I awoke with a start, my heart pounding like a drum. The room was plunged into darkness, save for the faint moonlight filtering through the tattered curtains. I glanced at my watch, 3 a.m. The witching hour, they called it. Supposedly, a time when the barrier between the living and the dead was at its thinnest. A rustling sound came from the corner of the room. I strained my eyes to see, and my blood turned to ice. A figure stood there, shrouded in shadow. I couldn't make out any features, but an overwhelming sense of malevolence radiated from it. My voice caught in my throat as I tried to call out, my tongue feeling heavy and useless. The figure began to glide towards me, its movements unnatural and disjointed. Panic surged through my veins, and I fumbled for my flashlight on the nightstand. With a trembling hand, I switched it on, and the beam of light pierced the darkness. The figure was gone. I told myself it was just a trick of the imagination, a product of the eerie setting and my overactive mind. But as I turned off the flashlight, a chilling whisper brushed against my ear.
Stay.
My heart raced, and I flipped the switch again. The figure was closer this time, its outline more defined. It had no face, just a gaping void where features should have been. Paralyzed with fear, I watched as it raised an arm, pointing a fingerless hand toward the window. My gaze followed its gesture, and my heart sank like a stone. Outside, in the moonlit courtyard, a procession of shadowy figures had gathered. Their forms were distorted and elongated, and they seemed to be moving in sync with some unheard rhythm. Dread settled in the pit of my stomach as I realized I was not alone. I was surrounded by the spirits of the damned. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. The figures outside began to sway and writhe, their movements growing more frenzied by the second. And then, as if on cue, they turned to face me, their hollow eyes fixing on mine. In that instant, a bone-chilling realization struck me: these spirits were not just random apparitions. They were bound by some unseen force, and now, that force was beckoning me to join them. The figure in the room gestured again, its movement urgent and insistent. Summoning all the willpower I could muster, I tore my gaze away from the window and focused on the room. The figure was closer now, its form flickering like a dying flame. I could feel its desire, its desperation to bridge the gap between our worlds. I closed my eyes and began to chant a prayer, a desperate plea for protection, for deliverance from this waking nightmare. When I opened my eyes again, the room was empty, and the moonlit procession had dissipated into the night. The remainder of that night was a blur of terror and uncertainty. As dawn broke, I gathered my belongings and fled the Hawthorne Manor, my mind forever scarred by the horrors I had witnessed. I had sought the supernatural, the thrill of the unknown, But I had found something far more sinister, a realm where the living and the dead converged, a place where the barriers of reality were as fragile as gossamer threads. And now, as I lay in my own bed, the memories of that night continue to haunt me. Every time the clock strikes 3 a.m., I can't help but feel a shiver run down my spine, a reminder that some things are best left undisturbed, that there are forces beyond our comprehension lurking in the shadows, waiting for the chance to cross over into our world once again. The wind howled outside the ancient inn, sending chills down my spine as I stared at the creaking sign that read "The Whispering Hollow Inn." My heart raced, but I refused to show any sign of fear. I was Lily, a young lady who prided herself on her skepticism and unyielding belief that ghosts were nothing more than figments of imagination. My friends had dared me to spend a night in this reputedly haunted place to prove I was as tough as I claimed to be. With an air of confidence, I had accepted the challenge, eager to demonstrate that I could easily handle whatever this old inn could throw my way. Little did I know, the night ahead would test not just my courage, but the very foundation of my beliefs. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the inn took on an eerie atmosphere. The flickering gas lamps cast uneven shadows on the walls, and the air was heavy with a musty scent that seemed to whisper secrets of the past. I settled into the room they had assigned me, determined to spend the night with unwavering resolve. Clock struck midnight, and I decided to get some rest. I lay in the creaky bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to dismiss the unsettling feeling that had settled over me. The minutes ticked by slowly, and just as I was starting to drift off, a faint, distant whisper brushed against my ears. I jolted upright, my heart pounding. "It's just the wind," I muttered to myself, trying to brush off the unease. But then I noticed the chill in the room had deepened, despite the absence of any breeze. I pulled the covers tighter around me, reminding myself that cold spots were common in old buildings. I glanced at the clock, 3 a.m. The time that was said to be the threshold between the living and the dead. I scoffed at the superstition, determined not to let my imagination run wild. Just as I was beginning to calm down, a soft, mournful wail echoed through the corridor outside my room. My skepticism wavered, but I clenched my fists, refusing to give in to fear. "It's probably just a stray cat," I reasoned, though deep down, I knew there was something unnatural about the sound. I decided to investigate, slipping out of bed and tiptoeing towards the door. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight, and with each step, the wailing grew louder and more anguished. I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to steady my racing heart. The corridor was dimly lit, the flickering gas lamps casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. I followed the sound, my heart in my throat, until I reached the end of the hall. There, a door stood slightly ajar, the source of the mournful cries. Summoning every ounce of courage, I pushed the door open, revealing a room bathed in an eerie, pale light. In the center of the room, a figure was hunched over, its back to me. The wailing emanated from it, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Hello?" I called out, my voice quivering despite my efforts to sound confident. The figure slowly turned, and my breath caught in my throat. Its eyes were hollow sockets, staring into me with a melancholic longing. Its lips, or what remained of them, trembled as it continued to emit that heartrending wail. I stumbled back, my skepticism crumbling before this undeniable proof of the supernatural. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. Ghosts weren't real. And yet, here it was, right in front of me. The specter took a step towards me, its ethereal form moving without the constraints of the physical world. I wanted to flee, to scream, but my voice was trapped in my throat. I was frozen, rooted to the spot, a silent witness to this haunting apparition. As the clock struck 3:15 a.m., the specter's wailing reached a crescendo, a symphony of sorrow and despair that reverberated through the room. Its gaze bore into me, and for the first time I felt a connection that transcended the boundaries of life and death. Tears streamed down my face as I finally understood the truth. Ghosts were real. And this one, tormented and trapped in its own agony, had shattered my skepticism and left me a believer in the most chilling way possible. The specter's form began to fade, the wailing growing fainter as the first light of dawn crept into the room. And then, with a final, mournful glance, it was gone, leaving me alone in the room, trembling and forever changed. I stumbled out of the inn at first light, my conviction shattered, my skepticism replaced by a bone-deep terror. The experience had left an indelible mark on my soul, a reminder that the world was far more mysterious and chilling than I had ever allowed myself to believe. From that day on, I couldn't escape the memory of those hollow eyes and that haunting wail. The Whispering Hollow Inn had proven to me that some truths were beyond our comprehension, and that darkness could lurk in the most unexpected corners of our reality. The moment I stepped through the creaking door of the old house, I felt an inexplicable chill crawl down my spine. It wasn't just the October wind that sent shivers racing across my skin, it was the unsettling aura that seemed to permeate every corner of the place. The real estate agent had assured me that this charming, cozy home was an incredible deal, one that I couldn't afford to miss. And she was right, the price was unusually low for such a beautiful property. Despite my reservations, I couldn't resist the allure of having a place all to myself during my college years. The first few weeks in the house were peaceful. I was busy with classes and assignments, and the charm of the old place began to grow on me. But then, things started to change. It was as if the house itself was subtly shifting, revealing its darker nature. I first noticed the strange occurrences shortly after moving in. The clock on the wall would occasionally tick erratically, its hands spinning wildly before settling back into a normal rhythm. Objects would inexplicably shift from where I left them, and I could never shake the feeling that I was being watched. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard faint whispering echoing through the hallway. I dismissed it as the wind, my imagination playing tricks on me. But then, I saw it. A shadowy figure moved just at the edge of my vision, disappearing the moment I turned to look. My heart raced, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. That night, I was jolted awake at exactly 3 a.m. I groggily rubbed my eyes and sat up, my heart pounding. I had a feeling of being watched, but the room was empty. I told myself it was just a nightmare, but the feeling lingered. I glanced at the clock and shivered. It was always at 3 a.m. when I woke up. The following nights, the routine continued. I'd be torn from my slumber at 3 a.m., my heart racing, and a sense of dread hanging in the air. I started to avoid looking at the clock, afraid of confirming the time. I began to feel exhausted, drained by the restless nights and the constant fear that gripped me. Desperation drove me to seek help. I invited a group of friends to stay over one weekend, hoping their presence would dispel the haunting atmosphere. As we chatted and laughed in the living room, I felt a brief respite from the fear that had consumed me. But as the clock approached 3 a.m., the laughter died down, and a heavy silence settled over the room. I watched the clock, unable to tear my gaze away. As the second hand ticked closer to the dreaded hour, a cold breeze swept through the room, extinguishing the candles we had lit earlier. My friends exchanged nervous glances, their faces pale. And then, at precisely 3 a.m., a blood-curdling scream tore through the silence. I whipped around, my heart pounding, to find one of my friends staring at the wall, her eyes wide with terror. I followed her gaze, and there, on the wall, was a ghastly apparition, a face twisted in agony, eyes hollow pits of darkness. We fled the house in a panic, leaving behind our belongings. I never returned, but the horror stayed with me. My once peaceful sanctuary had become a nightmare, a place of darkness that clung to me even after I left. The image of that twisted face haunted my dreams, and I could never shake the feeling that something malevolent had attached itself to me. Months passed, and I tried to move on with my life. I found a new place to live, far away from that accursed house. But the memories lingered, and the fear still gripped me every time 3 a.m. rolled around. No matter where I was, I would wake up, drenched in sweat, unable to escape the haunting hour. I sought the help of experts, paranormal investigators, psychics, priests, but none could offer me relief. The entity that had attached itself to me seemed unshakable, its hold on my life growing stronger with each passing day.
As I write this, I can feel its presence, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the clock to strike 3 a.m. once again. I am trapped in a perpetual cycle of fear, a prisoner of the horror that has consumed me. The cozy house that once seemed like a dream has become my personal nightmare, and I fear that I will never escape its clutches. So, if you ever come across a charming, cozy home being offered at an unusually low price, with the clock on the wall frozen at 3 a.m., I implore you to stay far away. There are forces beyond our understanding, forces that can turn our dreams into unspeakable horrors, and once they have you in their grip, there may be no escape.
I can see that most of you haven't subscribed to my channel yet. Subscribe to my channel to get more horror stories like this. If you don't subscribe, someone will wake you up at 3 a.m. by removing your blanket or pulling you out the bed. Subscribe now.